Good morning. I hope you all had a nice 4th of July. Democrats' one-party rule in Washington has failed hardworking families across America. Just this morning, we learned that Biden inflation hit another 40-year high, soaring to 9.1%. And Democrats' war on American energy has every American family feeling pain at the pump, as gas prices have more than doubled under this administration because of Joe Biden's energy crisis. And these historic gas prices hit rural areas like my district in upstate New York particularly hard. I can also tell you firsthand that parents are still struggling to buy baby formula, with nearly half of powder baby formula out of stock in states across this country. And yet this is months and months and months after the Biden administration was warned of this looming crisis. Yet House Democrats continue to pass the buck on these crises because they have no solutions to any of these crises that they have created. I have long said that the American people are smart. They know that Joe Biden and House Democrats' failed policies are to blame for crisis after crisis in this country. And in fact, new polling found that nearly 60% of Americans say the federal government under Democrat one-party rule is to blame for today's economic crisis. And 80%, a stunning number, think the country is on the wrong track. Families deserve better, and House Republicans will provide solutions to these crises and hold this failed Biden administration accountable when we work to earn the majority in November. I would like to now turn it over to my colleague, Congressman Steve Womack.
Thank you, Elise, and good morning, all. I've been here long enough to be witness to a lot of events that kind of lead us to where we are today. It hasn't been that long ago when, under a previous administration, the Obama administration, with Joe Biden as his vice president, where Energy Secretary Stephen Chu said in a hearing, somehow we have to figure out how to boost the price of gasoline to the levels in Europe. Now, later he had to walk that back because of the backlash. But the issues that we're facing today, that every American is facing today, is not new. This is not accidental. This is intentional. This is the desire of the left to shape the behavior of Americans because of their radical energy policies. And then more recently, in the markups of the appropriation bills in the House of Representatives, I offered amendments that would simply stop the regulatory burdens on American business and industry and on everyday people until gas prices could go back to pre-pandemic levels at $2.47 a gallon, and that the CPI would be reduced to 2.1. Not a big ask, just simply let's slow the regulatory process down until we can get our costs back to normal, pre-pandemic levels. Not a single Democrat voted for those amendments. So here we are today. As Elise said, 9.1% inflation. And actually, if you ask experts, they will tell you that when all things are considered, it's actually into the double digits. The people aren't going to be fooled. Every day when they show up at the pump, they're paying the price. So, let us have an opportunity to reduce prices at the pump, lower utility bills, provide jobs for American workers, strengthen national security, and lower inflation. I'll leave you with this. The Democrats want you to believe that they have an all-of-the-above energy policy. But they actually have an energy policy that's all but one. It's time to reverse course. America can no longer afford this economy. Thank you.
We'll now go to Bill Huizenga from Michigan.
Thanks. Well, you've heard the numbers. I'm going to talk a little bit about what that means. Now, back in Michigan, we know that this is affecting families, those hardworking taxpayers that are trying to put food on the table, trying to get ready for back to school. They're trying to maybe squeeze in a family vacation, and they're not able to do that. Who is affected are those family farmers. They might be a blueberry farmer or an egg producer that's in my district. They might be a senior who had to literally put food back on the shelf as they were grocery shopping because they can no longer afford it on their fixed income. Or maybe they're that young family that had budgeted $150 a month for gas to get back and forth to work and to get the kids around. That's now become a $300 a month line item. And that day trip out to Lake Michigan so that they could enjoy a Saturday or a Sunday, well, forget it. Sorry, kids, we're turning the sprinkler on and you're going to have to run through it. That's the extent of the recreational dollars that they have. So we understand the issues fully. And everybody does, whether they acknowledge it or not. They feel it in their gut. But this should not be a surprise. This is the frustrating part. I sit on the Financial Services Committee. And it is a surprise to my Democrat colleagues every single time that we get some sort of bad economic news. Now, early on, you had Janet Yellen and even Jay Powell trying to talk about this being transitory, and that it really was more about corporate greed and really more about maybe Vladimir Putin, and certainly didn't have anything to do with their policies. Well, we know that's not the case. We know that. Economists will tell you that it's monetary policy and fiscal policy, this rampant spending that we have had, this cheap money that has been thrown in, that is a significant part of this inflation increase. We know that it's labor and energy and things like a stimulus checks going out. And that seems to be the Democrats' only answer to this. We're going to send you a gas card and send you another stimulus check. All that's going to do is add fuel to that inflation fire. And we've got to stop that. So we on this committee on financial services have been talking about this for well over a year, trying to rein in the Federal Reserve, trying to rein in Congress's appetite for spending, knowing that that is fueling this. And if we don't do so soon, we are going to be in even worse trouble. And it is going to be a redo of the Carter administration. And we cannot have that. We cannot allow that to happen. So with that, I'd like to introduce Steve Scalise.
Thank you, Bill. In another weekend, we've seen even more dismal numbers. And when we look at these 40-year low inflation, the 40-year worst inflation numbers, 9.1%. What does that really mean? What it means is families are paying more for everything they buy. When they go to the grocery store, they're paying 10, 15% more if they can find the things they're looking for. As Elise talked about, you can't even find baby formula at most stores you go to, or there's a limit on how much under Joe Biden's failed agenda. If you try to go to the gas station, you might need to fill up your car, and maybe you can't make it because gas prices are so high, more than double when Joe Biden took office. That is a kick to the gut to low and middle income families. They're the ones hit the hardest by these policies, and these are Joe Biden's policies. Everybody knows it. And if you don't wonder where the problem really lies, just look at what Joe Biden says. Every week he's trying to blame somebody different. If it really was Vladimir Putin's fault, then it would have been Putin's fault 2 months ago and 3 months ago and 1 week ago. But that's not where Joe Biden is. He tried blaming Putin. Then he tried blaming the oil companies. He actually blamed it on COVID at one point. Then he said it's the refineries. Then he blamed local gas stations. The one thing he hasn't done is looked in the mirror and blamed himself. Joe Biden is on his way to Saudi Arabia to beg them to produce more oil. Well, he went all the way to France to be told by France's leader that Saudi Arabia doesn't have enough oil to meet the needs of America. And in fact, Saudi's a cartel. They're a member of OPEC. He was begging Putin for more oil. He's going to be begging Iran and other tyrannical dictators for more oil when we have everything we need here. He could just go to Port Fourchon in my district, in the deep waters of the Gulf of Mexico, where there are vast reserves that cannot be produced because he won't give permits to exercise leases. People can't even produce the wells that they have because Joe Biden said no to American energy. He hasn't said no to all energy. He's okay with foreign countries producing energy at a higher carbon emission, by the way, if you're concerned about carbon footprint. And what's the carbon footprint of the 11,000 plus miles he's flying on Air Force One to go beg Saudis to produce more oil? He could save all of that jet fuel. There are no solar panels on Air Force One. It's jet fuel he's using. It's very expensive. But he's the one who raised these prices. He's the reason we have this record high inflation, and he won't reverse course. Joe Biden will not work with House Republicans to fix these problems. And we've laid out a series of solutions, and he won't meet with us. Look at the agenda this week. Look at the agenda before we left for July 4th. They won't bring any bills to solve any of these problems. There is a border crisis going on in our country. And it's so bad that it's created a fentanyl crisis that is killing tens of thousands of people. 100,000 young people died last year from drug overdoses, mostly by fentanyl, which is made in China, coming across our southern border because Joe Biden turned our border over to drug cartels. And he won't work with us to fix that. That's why when you look at polling that just came out today, 64% of Democrats don't want Joe Biden to be the Democrat nominee for president in 2024. They're running away from him. But they won't work with us to fix these problems. And that's where Speaker Pelosi has failed, because she continues to double down on the far left agenda, using the House floor to carry out a real far left radical socialist agenda rather than working with us to solve real problems that are hurting, crushing, hardworking, low-income families. So we stand ready to fix these problems. When we're in the majority, we will work to fix these problems. But in the meantime, we're going to continue to call on Joe Biden to meet his promise to do better. And he's failed the American people at that. And unfortunately, they're the ones who are paying the price. With that, we'll be happy to take some questions. Yeah.
So if I can ask a question about COVID, we've seen a rise in cases once again. Democrats kind of have this stalled request for funding from the White House for more therapeutics and more vaccines. Do you believe, given this spike that we've seen this summer and the possibility of more cases come the fall, that the federal government, Congress, has any role to play in curbing that or providing more funding for vaccines?
Well, if you look, there's tens of billions of dollars in funding for COVID that's still unspent. And this administration, if you just look at Joe Biden's FDA, it took him over a year to get ahead of the FDA. It was referred to as a rudderless ship during that period. So they could have been and should have been producing more therapeutics, more vaccines. And Joe Biden, day one, should have had somebody ready to go at the FDA, and he didn't. And by the way, that was one of the problems that created this baby formula shortage, coming out of his failed rudderless ship of an FDA. And so the money is there. They just haven't done a good job of being stewards of the people's tax dollars.
So you don't think anything new needs to be done?
Well, there's tens of billions of dollars sitting unspent. The problem is you have incompetent people working under the Biden administration that won't fix these problems. You know, who is he holding accountable? He has his top military advisors who said that Afghanistan was not going to fall to the Taliban. 48 hours later, it fell. He had his top advisors saying that Russia was going to take over Kyiv within days. They still haven't, because Ukraine has been so strong at pushing them out. When he went to France and had to be told in France that Saudi doesn't have enough energy to meet our needs, he should have fired all of his energy advisors, from his Secretary of Energy to his Secretary of Interior, that day. But he won't hold anybody accountable for his failings. He just tries to blame other people, and people are fed up with it.
Victoria Spartz has been criticizing the Ukrainian government so strongly that she prompted a response from Ukraine's foreign ministry. Are you concerned about her comments and allegations? And are you feeling like this is undermining congressional support for Ukraine?
Well, Victoria has been a strong advocate of getting the people of Ukraine the tools they need to push back against Putin. I know she's gone in herself a number of times into Ukraine just over the last few months. Obviously, she's the only member of Congress who was born in Ukraine. She's very passionate about this. And at the end of the day, I know from all the conversations I've had with her that her heart and soul is tied to helping the people of Ukraine push back Putin's military assault on that country.
It seems like the China competitiveness bill, or the conference China bill, seems to be kind of in flux right now between House and Senate. What do you think needs to happen? It seems like Pelosi doesn't want to bring forward just the Senate bill. So I was wondering.
Right. Yeah. Speaker Pelosi and Leader Hoyer just made that announcement today. But in the end, this bill is being negotiated mostly in the Senate. We have a number of negotiators on our side that are trying to fix some of the many problems. But Leader McConnell has also made it clear that trying to move forward with a $1 trillion plus tax and spend bill at the same time makes this a non-starter. And ultimately, especially when you look at 9.1% inflation, Again, a 40-year high on inflation numbers. Why in God's name would the Senate be trying to negotiate another $1 trillion in taxes and spending that would cripple the economy even more, that would raise prices on families even higher? So I hope they give that up, get back to working on something that could be bipartisan.
Last question.
I like your exuberance for raising your hand.
I have a question on immigration. So yesterday, President Biden met with the Mexican president. Mexican president had a lot of ideas. One of those was to increase the number of visas to help with the labor shortage here in the United States. Is that something Republicans in Congress might get behind?
You know, one thing we've said is the first thing you have to do is secure the border. There's been a lot of attempts over decades to try to deal with interior border problems, interior immigration problems. You can't really start that conversation until you first secured America's border. And Joe Biden walked into office with a secure border. We had that agreement with Mexico. Remain in Mexico was a heavily negotiated agreement between President Trump and the President of Mexico, and Joe Biden jettisoned it day one. He also jettisoned the Northern Triangle agreements. He stopped building the wall, which was being effective at keeping people out that are trying to get here illegally so we can get back to a legally working system. And let's keep in mind this. America has the most generous immigration laws in the world. We let over 1 million people into our country legally every year. The number 2 nation in the world is not even close to us. Yet, right now, you've got millions of people that have come across illegally. So many people that came to this country legally, that followed the rules to live the American dream, are offended by the idea that millions of people just come across illegally. Enriching, by the way, the drug cartels, the coyotes. Billions of dollars of money is going to these drug cartels because Joe Biden created this open border by abandoning the things that were working. So I hope he gets back to what will work. Again, we will be rolling out an agenda later in the summer to show the country how we'll address all of these problems and what we would do if we won a House Republican majority next year. Thank you all.
Follow up on immigration really quick. One of the Democrats mentioned that asylum reform would be an answer to this, and also some Republicans.
We need to first secure American border before we talk about any of the other serious problems.